What happens when one of the most talked about public figures walks onto a daytime talk show stage, smiles for the cameras, and then proceeds to ignite a firestorm so intense that the host has no choice but to shut it all down? In just 35 seconds, a single comment would turn what started as a friendly conversation into one of the most shocking exits in talk show history. This is the story of how Meghan walked onto Kelly Clarkson's show and left America stunned. Let's set the scene. The studio lights are bright, the audience is buzzing with excitement, and Kelly Clarkson is doing what she does best, making her guests feel comfortable. Kelly has built her entire brand on being warm, relatable, and down to earth. She's the kind of host who laughs with you, cries with you, and treats every single person who sits across from her like they're an old friend catching up over coffee. So when Meghan Markle walked out onto that stage, everyone expected the usual charm, the usual grace, the usual carefully crafted answers that Meghan had become known for. Kelly stood up, gave Meghan a warm hug, and welcomed her with genuine enthusiasm. The audience clapped. Meghan waved. Everything seemed perfectly normal. They both sat down, and Kelly, ever the professional, kicked things off with a softball question. Something light. Something easy. She asked Meghan about her recent projects, about what she'd been up to, about how life had been treating her. Standard talk show fare. Nothing controversial. Nothing that would ruffle any feathers. Meghan smiled that practiced smile and started talking. At first, it was fine. She talked about her work, about the causes she cared about wanting to make a difference in the world. Kelly nodded along, encouraging her, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely interested. The conversation flowed naturally, or at least it seemed to. But then something shifted. You could feel it in the air. The tone changed. Meghan's answers started getting a little longer, a little more pointed, a little more personal. Kelly, being the gracious host she is, tried to steer things back to safer territory. She asked about Meghan's family, thinking it would be a sweet moment, a chance to talk about something positive. But instead of giving a warm, fuzzy answer, Meghan's face hardened just a bit. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She started talking about how difficult things had been, how misunderstood she felt, how the media had treated her unfairly. And then she said something that made Kelly's eyebrows raise just slightly. "You know, Kelly," Meghan said, her voice taking on an edge, "not everyone understands what it's like to be under constant scrutiny. Not everyone has had to deal with the kind of pressure I've been under. Some people just coast through life without ever having to fight for anything." The audience went quiet. Kelly blinked. You could see her processing what had just been said. Was that a dig? Was Meghan implying that Kelly hadn't struggled? That she hadn't worked hard to get where she was? Kelly Clarkson, who famously won American Idol as a regular girl from Texas, who built an entire career from the ground up, who had been open about her own struggles with divorce, single motherhood, and the pressures of fame. That Kelly Clarkson? But Kelly, ever the professional, kept her cool. She laughed it off, made a little joke to lighten the mood, and tried to move the conversation forward. "Well, I think we've all had our fair share of challenges," Kelly said with a smile that was maybe a little tighter than before. "But that's what makes us stronger, right?" Meghan didn't laugh. She didn't smile. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Kelly's, and said, "Some challenges are bigger than others, Kelly, and some people get more credit for less work." Oh boy. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The producers backstage were probably scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. And Kelly, bless her heart, still tried to keep things civil. She took a breath, maintained her composure, and responded with grace. "You know, Meghan," Kelly said, her voice steady but firm, "I think everyone's journey is different. We all face things that are hard in our own ways. And I've always believed in celebrating each other's successes rather than comparing struggles. It was a perfect response. Classy, diplomatic, the kind of thing that should have diffused the situation. But Meghan wasn't having it. Instead of backing down, instead of taking the hint, she doubled down. She scoffed, actually scoffed, on national television. "That's easy to say when you've had it easy, Kelly," Meghan said, her tone dripping with condescension. "When you've been handed opportunities left and right. When you haven't had to claw your way through the kind of obstacles I've faced." And there it was. The line had been crossed. Kelly's face changed. The warmth that she was known for, that genuine kindness that made millions of people love her, flickered for just a moment. You could see her jaw tighten. Her smile faded. But she didn't raise her voice. She didn't get defensive. Instead, she did something even more powerful. She stayed calm. "Meghan," Kelly said quietly, her voice firm but controlled, "I don't think you know my story as well as you think you do. And honestly, I don't think this is the conversation we should be having right now. This is supposed to be a fun show, a place where people come to feel good. And I'm not going to sit here and have my life or my journey diminished." The audience erupted in applause. They were clapping for Kelly, supporting her, showing her that they had her back. But Meghan looked annoyed, like she couldn't believe that Kelly had the audacity to stand up for herself, like she expected Kelly to just sit there and take it. "Oh, come on," Meghan said, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be so sensitive. I'm just being honest. People need to hear the truth." Kelly shook her head. "Being honest doesn't mean being disrespectful. And right now, you're being disrespectful. Not just to me, but to everyone who's worked hard to get where they are. So I think it's best if we just end this here." Meghan's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected this. She thought she could say whatever she wanted, throw around whatever accusations she felt like, and Kelly would just smile and nod. But Kelly wasn't playing that game. Kelly had drawn a line, and she wasn't budging. "You're ending the interview?" Meghan asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "Because I spoke my truth?" "No," Kelly said firmly. "I'm ending the interview because you came onto my show, sat in my chair, and decided to insult me and my journey. That's not speaking your truth. That's just being rude. And I don't have to tolerate that on my own show." The audience went wild. They cheered. They clapped. They stood up. This was a moment. Kelly Clarkson, America's sweetheart, had just stood up to someone who thought they could walk all over her, and the people loved her for it. But Meghan was not happy. Not at all. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "I can't believe I wasted my time coming here." Kelly remained seated, her posture calm and composed. She didn't engage. She didn't argue. She simply watched as Meghan fumbled with her microphone, trying to unhook it from her outfit with shaking hands. The studio was dead silent now, except for the sound of Meghan's heels clicking against the floor as she prepared to storm off. Before she could leave, though, Kelly spoke one more time. Her voice was steady, clear, and carried across the entire studio. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Meghan. I really do. But you're not going to find it by tearing other people down." Meghan spun around, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. She stood there for a moment, caught between wanting to fire back and knowing that anything she said would only make things worse. Finally, she turned on her heel and walked off the stage, disappearing behind the curtain as the audience continued to applaud Kelly. Kelly took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and turned to the camera with a smile that was just a little bit weary, but still genuine. "Well," she said with a small laugh, "that was unexpected. But you know what? Life is full of surprises. And sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself and what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable." the audience erupted again, this time with even more enthusiasm. They were on their feet, clapping and cheering for Kelly, showing their support in the most visible way possible. Kelly waved to them, thanked them, and then the show cut to commercial. But the damage was done. The moment was captured, and within minutes, it would be everywhere. Let's rewind a bit and talk about how we even got to this point. Because this wasn't just some random outburst. There was a build-up, a series of small moments that, when you look back, make it clear that this confrontation was almost inevitable. When Meghan first arrived at the studio, she was all smiles. She greeted the crew, posed for photos, and played the part of the gracious guest. But according to people who were there were little hints that something was off. She made a few comments about the setup of the stage, about how the lighting wasn't quite right, about how her chair wasn't positioned correctly. Nothing major, just little digs that showed she wasn't entirely pleased with the arrangements. The production team, being professionals, made the adjustments she requested. They moved her chair, they tweaked the lights, they did everything they could to make her comfortable. But it didn't seem to matter. Meghan still seemed tense, still seemed on edge, like she was gearing up for something. When the interview actually started, things seemed fine at first. The initial questions were easy. Meghan talked about her latest projects, her passions, the things she cared about. Kelly listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and genuinely seemed interested in what Meghan had to say. There was no reason to think things would go sideways. But then Kelly asked about balance, about how Meghan managed to juggle all her different responsibilities. It was such an innocent question, the kind of question every talk show host asks. But Meghan's response was anything but innocent. She launched into a speech about how hard her life was, about how nobody understood the pressure she was under, about how she had to fight for everything while other people just had things handed to them. And the way she said it, the tone she used, made it crystal clear that she was taking shots at Kelly. Kelly tried to laugh it off at first. She made a joke about how everyone has their own challenges, about how life is hard for everyone in different ways. But Meghan didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just stared at Kelly with this look that said she wasn't buying it. And then she said it. The comment that would change everything. "Some of us have had to work twice as hard for half the recognition," Meghan said, her eyes fixed on Kelly. "Some of us don't get to just sing a song and become America's sweetheart. Some of us have to actually fight." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop, because everyone knew what Meghan was implying. She was saying that Kelly hadn't worked hard, that Kelly's success was just luck, that Kelly didn't deserve the love and admiration she'd earned over 2 decades in the entertainment industry. And that was the moment everything changed. Kelly's face hardened, not in an angry way, but in a way that showed she was done playing nice. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and looked Meghan dead in the eye. "You know what, Meghan? I think you need to check yourself, because I've worked my entire life to get where I am. I came from nothing. I sang my heart out on a reality show and got lucky, yes. But I've spent every day since then proving that I deserve to be here. So don't you dare sit there and diminish my journey." The audience lost it. They cheered so loud that the sound echoed through the studio. They were on Kelly's side completely. And why wouldn't they be? Kelly had always been real with them. She'd shared her struggles, her heartbreaks, her triumphs. She'd never pretended to be perfect. She'd always been honest about the work it took to maintain her career, her family, her sanity. And now, here was someone who barely knew her trying to act like it had all been easy. But Meghan, instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of recognizing that she'd crossed a line, just doubled down. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, please, you don't know what real struggle is. You have no idea." And that was it. That was the moment Kelly decided she'd had enough. She stood up, And when Kelly Clarkson stands up in the middle of an interview, you know things are serious. She looked at Meghan with an expression that was somehow both disappointed and resolute. "I'm going to ask you to leave now," Kelly said, her voice calm but final. "This interview is over." Meghan looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe that Kelly was actually kicking her off the show, like she thought she was untouchable. But Kelly wasn't backing down. She gestured toward the exit, and the message was clear. It was time for Meghan to go. "This is unbelievable," Meghan sputtered, her composure finally cracking. "You're kicking me off your show because I told the truth?" "No," Kelly said firmly. "I'm asking you to leave because you came here with an agenda, and it wasn't to have a conversation. It was to make yourself look good by making me look bad. And I'm not interested in being part of that." Meghan's face turned red. Whether it was from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. Probably both. She grabbed her purse, yanked off her microphone with more force than necessary, and stormed toward the exit. But before she disappeared completely, she turned back one last time. "You'll regret this, Kelly," she said, her voice shaking. Kelly just shook her head. "The only thing I regret is giving you a platform to spread negativity. But I won't make that mistake again." And with that, Meghan was gone. She disappeared behind the curtain, and the studio erupted in applause once again. Kelly stood there for a moment, taking it all in, and then she smiled. A real, genuine smile. The kind that showed she knew she'd done the right thing, even though it hadn't been easy. She turned to the audience and said, "You know, sometimes in life, you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's not what people expect. Because at the end of the day, you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you didn't let anyone disrespect you or your journey." The audience gave her a standing ovation. They clapped. They cheered. They showed Kelly that they supported her decision 100%. And Kelly, being Kelly, got a little emotional. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she was smiling through them. Because this wasn't just about standing up to one person. It was about standing up for herself, for her worth, for the years of hard work she'd put in. Now let's talk about what was really happening beneath the surface. Because this wasn't just a random clash of personalities. This was a clash of worldviews. On one side, you had Kelly Clarkson, who had built her entire career on authenticity, hard work, and treating people with respect. She'd never been the type to play games or throw people under the bus. She'd always been straightforward, honest, and kind. Even when she'd gone through tough times in her personal life, even when she'd faced criticism, she'd handled it with grace. On the other side, you had Meghan, who seemed to believe that her struggles gave her the right to diminish everyone else's. She walked into that studio with an attitude, with a chip on her shoulder, and with a clear intention to make herself the victim and Kelly the villain. But Kelly wasn't having it. Kelly knew her worth. She knew her story, and she wasn't about to let anyone rewrite it. What made this moment so powerful was that Kelly didn't lose her cool. She didn't yell. She didn't get into a screaming match. She simply stood her ground. She set a boundary, and when Meghan refused to respect it, Kelly enforced it. That's real strength. That's real class. And that's why the audience rallied behind her so completely. Think about the contrast for a moment. Kelly, who had every right to be defensive, who could have snapped back with her own list of struggles and hardships, chose instead to simply say, "This isn't okay, and I'm not going to allow it." Meanwhile, Meghan, who came in acting superior and entitled, ended up looking small and petty. She'd tried to make Kelly look bad, but all she'd done was expose her own insecurities and her own need to tear others down to feel important. As Meghan left the studio, you could see it on her face. The realization that she'd miscalculated, that she'd underestimated Kelly, that she'd walked into a situation thinking she had all the power, and she'd walked out having lost all of it. Because when you try to diminish someone who is genuinely beloved, someone who has earned their place through talent and hard work and kindness, it doesn't make them look bad. It makes you look bad. Kelly, on the other hand, came out of this moment looking stronger than ever. She'd shown that she wasn't a pushover, that she wouldn't tolerate disrespect, even from someone who thought their status gave them a free pass to be rude. And the audience loved her for it. Because in that moment, Kelly represented something bigger than just herself. She represented everyone who'd ever been talked down to, everyone who'd ever had their hard work dismissed, everyone who'd ever been made to feel less than. The studio audience wasn't just clapping for Kelly. They were clapping for the idea that you don't have to accept being treated poorly, that you can stand up for yourself with dignity and grace, that you can draw a line and say, "This is not okay," without being aggressive or cruel. Kelly had given them a masterclass in how to handle conflict with class, and they were here for it. After Meghan left, Kelly took a moment to compose herself. She sat back down in her chair, smoothed her hair, and let out a long breath. You could see the tension leaving her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd stood up for herself, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had gotten better. The audience was still cheering. The energy in the room was electric. And Kelly, despite the awkwardness of the situation, she looked more confident than she had at the start of the interview. She addressed the audience directly, her voice warm and genuine. "I want to thank you all for being here today," she said. "I know that wasn't exactly the fun, lighthearted show we usually have, but sometimes life throws you curveballs, and you just have to deal with them the best you can. And I hope that by standing up for myself today, maybe I encourage some of you to stand up for yourselves too." The audience erupted again. They weren't just clapping politely anymore. They were giving her a full-on standing ovation. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling, showing their support in every way they could. And Kelly, who had always been humble, who had always deflected praise, allowed herself to accept it. She smiled, wiped away a tear, and nodded her thanks. "You know," Kelly continued, "I've been doing this show for a while now, and I've interviewed a lot of people. Most of them are wonderful. Most of them are kind and respectful and genuinely happy to be here. But every once in a while, you get someone who comes in with a different energy. Someone who wants to use your platform to make themselves look good at your expense. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can let it slide, or you can say something. And today, I chose to say something." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I say the wrong thing sometimes. But one thing I will never do is let someone come into my house, sit in my chair, and disrespect me. Because this show is built on positivity and respect and lifting people up. And if you can't get on board with that, then this isn't the place for you." More applause, more cheers. The audience was completely with her. They understood what she was saying, and they agreed with it. Because at the end of the day, respect is a two-way street. You can't expect people to treat you well if you're not willing to treat them well in return. And Meghan had violated that basic principle of human decency. Kelly wrapped up the show with her usual grace. She thanked the audience again, thanked her crew, and reminded everyone to be kind to each other. It was a message she'd delivered 1,000 times before, but today it felt different. Today, it felt earned. Because she'd just modeled exactly what she was talking about. She'd been kind until kindness was no longer an option, and then she'd been firm. Not mean, not cruel, but firm. And that's the balance that so many people struggle to find. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience filed out, the buzz in the room was palpable. People were talking about what they'd just witnessed. They were processing it. They were already imagining how it would play out when the episode aired, because everyone knew this was going to be a big deal. This was the kind of moment that people would be talking about for weeks, maybe months. Kelly, for her part, seemed relieved. She'd been nervous about how it would go down, about whether she'd done the right thing, about whether people would understand. But seeing the audience's reaction, hearing their support, feeling their energy, it all confirmed what she'd known in her gut. She'd made the right call. She'd stood up for herself. And she'd done it in a way that was true to who she was. Backstage, the crew was buzzing too. They'd seen the whole thing unfold, and they were proud of Kelly for handling it the way she did. They'd worked with her long enough to know that she never wanted drama, that she always tried to make things work, that she bent over backwards to make her guests comfortable. But they also knew that she had a limit, and Meghan had found it. One of the producers approached Kelly after the show and said, "That took guts. I'm proud of you." Kelly smiled, still a little shaky from the adrenaline, and said, "I just couldn't let it go. I couldn't sit there and let her talk to me like that. It wouldn't have been fair to me. And it wouldn't have been fair to everyone watching who's ever been made to feel small." And that right there is what made this moment so powerful. It wasn't just about Kelly versus Meghan. It was about standing up for yourself when someone tries to diminish you. It was about refusing to accept treatment that you know is wrong. It was about setting boundaries and enforcing them, even when it's hard. Kelly had given everyone watching a template for how to handle these situations with grace and strength. The contrast between Kelly and Meghan couldn't have been starker. Kelly, who had everything to lose by kicking a high-profile guest off her show, chose integrity over optics. Meghan, who had everything to gain by being gracious and respectful, chose entitlement over common sense. And the results spoke for themselves. Now, Kelly came out looking like a hero. Meghan came out looking like someone who had let their ego write checks their behavior couldn't cash. As the dust settled, as the crew started packing up and the audience dispersed, Kelly sat alone in her dressing room for a few minutes. She needed a moment to process what had just happened, to let the reality of it sink in. She'd just ended an interview with one of the most talked about people in the world. She'd just stood up to someone who was used to getting their way, and she'd done it on live television in front of hundreds of people, knowing that millions more would see it eventually. But as she sat there, thinking it over, she didn't feel regret. She felt relief. Relief that she'd spoken up. Relief that she'd been true to herself. Relief that she'd shown her audience that it's okay to have boundaries, that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to refuse to be treated poorly. Because that's a lesson everyone needs to learn at some point. Kelly Clarkson had always been known for her voice, for her talent, for her warmth. But on this day, she became known for something else too. Her strength, her backbone, her willingness to stand up for herself when it mattered most. And that, more than any song she'd ever sung, more than any award she'd ever won, was what would make her a role model for countless people watching at home. This wasn't just a talk show moment. This was a cultural moment. A reminder that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat. That being nice doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. That you can be the good guy and still stand your ground. Kelly had proven all of that in the span of a single interview, and the world had taken notice. The moral of the story? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say, "No, this isn't okay." You don't have to yell. You don't have to fight. You just have to be firm in your boundaries and willing to enforce them. Kelly Clarkson showed us all how it's done. And Meghan Markle learned the hard way that not everyone will put up with entitlement and disrespect, no matter who you are.